And I was looking through it and I'm like, this isn't very useful at all. I'm new to this job and I could have written a better report. When you have a rare problem, who do you go to? Do you go to a generalist or do you go to a specialist who specializes in that problem? If you have a rare, top-of-the-line car, not many made in the whole world, would you take that car to a general mechanic or would you choose a specialist who specializes in that type of car? If you have a special medical problem, even the best general practitioner in the world isn't going to compare to a specialist who knows that medical condition. If you have a space-related business, would you go to a general consultant to have them answer your space-related questions? Or would you go to someone who is an expert in space? Hi, my name is Laura Forsick. I am the executive director of boutique space consulting firm Astralytical, helping businesses, government entities, and nonprofits to grow their businesses in space. I learned over the course of my career why it is so valuable to seek a specialist over a generalist when it comes to getting the best results for your business. I want to take you back in time to my first full-time job in the space sector. Now, I've had a lot of academic training, a lot of years in higher education. I didn't actually get my first full-time job in the space sector until my late 20s. I was working for an organization that helps the government to conduct research on the International Space Station for the benefit of life on Earth. One of my first tasks on the job was to review a consulting report that my employer had commissioned by a giant consulting company. You would know the name if I mentioned it. However, being in my late 20s, having only an academic background, no corporate training, I didn't actually know this brand. I didn't know that they were a big consulting company. And so I didn't have that in my head as I was reading this report. Instead, I read the report for the value that it contained, and I was disappointed. I was brand new on the job, but I was not brand new to the space sector. I've been working my entire career in space. And so even though I was somewhat new to ISS payloads and experimentation and microgravity benefit for life on Earth, I felt like I knew more than this report contained. So I was flipping through the pages of this report, trying to understand how I can do my job better, trying to get up to speed at this brand new job, this brand new role. And I was looking through it and I'm like, this isn't very useful at all. I'm new to this job and I could have written a better report. And it occurred to me as I started looking into who this consulting company was, that my employer probably spent a huge amount of money. They probably spent more than my annual salary on commissioning this report, and I could have written a better one in quicker time. And so that taught me pretty early on that you're better off seeking a specialist when it comes to space-related questions, topics. There's a benefit to seeking out a large consulting firm. And in fact, a lot of consulting firms now actually have space divisions. This particular consulting firm that I'm speaking of actually does now have a space division. However, at the time, they probably did not have anybody on staff who dedicated themselves to space. Whereas here I was completely dedicated to space, and I knew pretty well that this report was useless. It was commissioned for the brand name, but it did not provide value to my employer. At least not to me. Maybe it provided value to other people at my employer. I don't know. But again, I could have written a better report and I was brand new to the company. And I am not just talking about the difference between a general consulting firm and a specialized consulting firm. Even within space companies, there is a difference between the quality of information you get depending on how specialized that company is in the area of space that you're looking for. One of our early clients paid another company, an engineering company that does quite a bit of space. They paid this company $20,000 for a 20-page white paper, they called it, that was actually more like a brochure. The problem was this was really just aggregated information that was out there publicly Googleable. You could have put it together. A high schooler could have put it together. Anybody with a little bit of time who knows the search terms could have put this together. It was not very deep. There were no real insights. And it was also put together by people who had no space background. It puzzles me that this engineering company did have space specialists as part of their company, but who wrote the white paper were people who had no experience in aerospace. They had backgrounds in architecture and public sector projects, and this was not necessarily an architecture project. It was a public sector project, but it was a space project. Their background did not give them insights into space and the space industry and the space economy. And because the authors of this paper did not have a background in space, although the report ended up being generally good, there were actually some inaccuracies. Not even a year later, my client hired my company. We charged them, unfortunately, less than this. In full disclosure, I would charge more than this now, but we charged them for a 60-page report. And at the time, my client didn't even mention this report that they had commissioned not even a year ago. Don't take my word for it, but if they didn't mention it and they didn't really use it, then they probably did not see that as well spent money. So instead, they hired my company to write a much more extensive 60-page report that was much more valuable. It was quoted all over the place. They had me speak twice to present to stakeholders about the findings of this report. So it really goes to show, even if you hire a company that does things in space, it might not give you the value and it might not give you the overall product that you need. And you might have to go and then hire a specialist with more money to then give you what you actually were looking for in the first place. Let's go one step further. So I was speaking to a prospective client recently who was telling me about a report they commissioned from a well-known space consulting company, and it was not valuable to them. They paid 6 figures for it, and it really wasn't usable because what it provided was information that was well-known, Googleable, information that was shallow, but they needed information that was deep. So really, they needed the deep dives. They needed their prospective customer insights. They needed to know things that this company was not going to dive deeply and get for them. And so that is actually a benefit of hiring a smaller company that's going to go deeper within space versus a larger company that's going to stay shallow within space. So not all space-related consulting companies are the same. In fact, I was talking to a prospective client today as of this recording who was looking for more brand recognition. And I was explaining to them, well, if they're looking for brand recognition, they should actually hire this large space consulting firm and not my company, because we're not very well known. We're a small boutique firm. But if they're looking for small and agile, we're the ones to go with because we can really be responsive and quick. It really depends on what your business needs are. If you are looking for that brand recognition, if you are looking for something more recognizable, then go with the larger specialist company. If you're looking for deeper dives or more responsiveness or more partnership, then go with a smaller boutique firm like mine. It really can make a difference depending on what outcome you want. We had another client who hired us because they were in Europe, and so they very well understood ESA and the European ecosystem in space. So they actually were pretty space savvy. But what they did not know was the US market. So they hired us, a US space company, to give them an overview of the space industry. And not just any overview, not just an overview that they could have learned themselves with enough time. They wanted us to work with specific companies, specific partner companies that they worked with in their particular European region so that we could identify US counterparts, US competitors, US potential customers, US organizations, nonprofits, trade organizations, anybody who they could connect with in the US for their particular market segments of the space economy. So we gave them not just a report, which is pretty standard, but we also helped their partner companies refine their presentation materials, and we helped to set up meetings with potential customers in the US, and we helped them with those initial presentations and those initial meetings to start getting deals made. Now, I don't know about you, I've never worked for one of those large consulting companies, but I don't think large consulting companies do this. That is also a benefit of a specialist, is that we can walk with you every step of the way. We know the language, we understand what we're talking about, and we can help you with your messaging and your conversations. Do you all remember the investment boom that was 2021 with all of the SPACs and all of the investors coming into the space sector? Even if they didn't understand the space sector, they were interested in putting their money in a growing industry such as space. We had one client come to us who was full of money, and they were looking how to invest their money properly. And so they wanted us to review a pitch deck for a space startup that was getting a lot of publicity at the time, still sort of is, but for not good reasons. And they knew enough to know that they were not space specialists. They wanted a space specialist to review the information in the pitch deck, which Unfortunately, we found inaccuracies, we found exaggerations, and we pointed out where there might be inconsistencies with what they're claiming and the reality of the situation. And so our particular client declined to invest in this particular company, which ended up being a good move. Saved our client money, and sorry about the investors who actually did invest in this particular company, because I don't think it's going so well. Pitch deck review is something we do, by the way, on both sides. So if you're an investor or you are a space company looking to raise funds, we also review your pitch decks to make sure you don't make this mistake of looking bad when somebody else who knows what they're looking at is reviewing your pitch deck and looking to potentially give you money or not. We've also helped a small engineering firm reposition themselves and rebrand to be a space-related engineering firm. And they needed to understand who their potential customers were, who their competitors were, where they stood in the competitive landscape, whether or not they should partner with specific organizations, how they could use their existing technology to give them that value add. All of these components of looking at where they belonged in the space sector so that they can understand whether or not they wanted to become a specialist from a generalist, a general engineering company with a particular technology versus a space-related engineering company with a particular technology. And they decided that it was worth it for them to niche down, to go into space hardcore, to have that recognition within the space community as a specialist in this type of engineering. We've also helped a lunar mining startup understand where they belong in the marketplace. They were trying to understand what the current status was, who the other players were, and whether or not they could get their country's government involved. We also worked with a payload hosting company. They were trying to understand what the customer base was, what the market was for that kind of uncrewed space station, in a sense, space destination for experiments, payload, hosted operations, that kind of thing, that also could be returnable back to Earth. So have that recovery option. And they really didn't understand who the players were globally. They spoke to us as a specialist to understand where their microgravity users would be and who that low-hanging fruit was that they could initially start with, and whether or not they should initiate conversations with their governments. And all of those questions, which really you need a deep understanding of microgravity hosting and payloads and all of that to really get answers. We also worked with a major university here in the United States who was looking to expand its space research offerings, and not just anywhere. They wanted to understand where the cutting edge technology and innovation was, because they wanted to get in the news. They wanted to get the headlines. They wanted to have a return on our investment, in a sense, where they wanted to create a whole new branch, where they wanted to hire new faculty, not just any faculty, but the top faculty in that cutting edge research. And they wanted to understand where other universities were doing any kind of research that was cutting edge, and what kind of equipment and laboratories and facilities that they had, and who they could hire, who are the potential candidates who they could hire on to kickstart this brand new space initiatives. These are the types of clients who come to us because Astrolytical is a specialist. And we're not just a specialist anywhere. We actually turn away a lot of clients that don't fit. We're not a space engineering consulting company. We're not a telecommunications consulting company. So we actually turn away the people who are seeking specialists that don't match our abilities. Where we thrive and where our client needs are is that intersection that really makes the most sense. So if you are a company, a government entity, a nonprofit who is looking to expand in space, whether or not you are already operating in space, whether you're coming from outside the space sector and want to expand into this growing area of space, or maybe you're already within space and you want to expand elsewhere or expand your offerings, then come talk to us. We really thrive on the emerging space industry, and that is where the growth is. We're really excited to work with you as specialists in the space sector. So contact us at astrolytical.com, and we're happy to help you grow your business in space.